One of the great things about technology is that it has leveled the playing field, enabling even small businesses to get the same or similar tools that used to only be available to the big players. Despite the fact that technology is more accessible than ever before, it seems that many companies, particularly small to medium-sized suppliers, are still not taking advantage of it. But why is that? And what are the big benefits for these companies of digitizing their operations? Hi, I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me here on A Seat at the Table. It's really a pleasure to have your company, and I hope that you are enjoying learning from the many industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who are guests on the show, and that, like me, you benefit from their expertise, experience, and insights. It turns out that most SMEs look at digital solutions and think, only the big players can afford this. Those systems are not for companies like us. We're too small. Today I'm talking with Bernard Hor, co-founder of Hatio Group, a digital supply chain platform for Asian SMEs. With over a decade of experience working with Asian-based companies, he understands the challenges they face and has seen firsthand the huge impact that digitization can have on their business. In this episode, Bernard talks about how to get started digitizing your supply chain, which can often be a huge sticking point for companies that are just starting the digitization process, why you need to start small to be big, and the big wins that SMEs can expect from digitizing their operations. Before we get started, if you're a fashion industry executive and are constantly feeling overwhelmed by the daily deluge of information and news piling up in your inbox, some of which is just noise, if you know what I mean, then why not take a look at Inside Fashion's news briefings? You get concise executive summaries of top news and industry trends that keep you up to date in just a few minutes. You can learn more at insidefashionlive.net. That's insidefashionlive.net. I'll put a link in the show notes, and of course you can also find it on A Seat at the Table's website. Now let's find out how SMEs can join the digital transformation that's rocking and revolutionizing global supply chains. Bernard, I'm really excited to have you on A Seat at the Table because supply chain and all things related to it is a huge topic. I mean, it has been a crazy 2 years, and it just seems to be continuing along those lines with people trying to figure out realistically how do we get goods from point A to point B, and we're not even talking about the costs that have just skyrocketed on that. So I'd love to learn more about what you're doing, and certainly the fact that I think you were saying before that you actually have solutions for smaller companies, because I think that everybody's scrambling to figure, what do we do now? How can we solve it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jane, for having me on this show. And it's really great that I've been really connecting with many different hosts like yourself, and I've been having very interesting conversations. This is 2022, right? And supply chain digitization is no longer optional. Right. I guess COVID-19 has really upended the entire supply chain globally and locally. The uncertainties and the unpredictability, caused by this pandemic will just continue to increase, in my opinion. Right. So whether you're in the first mile, in the middle mile, or in the last mile, you're bound to be affected. Right. The level of disruption across the global supply chain only comes to show the urgent need to be able to respond in real time, right?
Absolutely.
And I think this can only be done, if the entire supply chain is visible and updates are current, right? So I guess Jane, the keyword here in question is not reluctance, and I think it's more of a fear, in my opinion, right? It's more of the fear that we are talking about here, the fear of the unknown. It's perhaps the main reason why companies are shying away from digitization. And I think that let's just maybe define a little bit the definition of companies here. We're not talking about, and as you say, we're not talking about the big brands and the big, giant retailers. They probably have the budgets to do all these things, right? And they probably have the budgets to fail as well. But we're talking about the meat to the smaller guys, right? And why they're shying away from the opportunity of digitization. As I observe the market, and I observe the Southeast Asian market and the Asian market, there is a lot of fear of the unknown, right? See, let me explain this further, right? See, the perception on the grounds is that digitization is always expensive, high investment, right? Big time investment is required. major infrastructures needs to be implemented, cloud technology, supply chain facilities like what you have, machines, AGVs, pick to light and all that, automation of logistic processes. It's like you just can't even, many people even struggle to actually envision it, right?
Right.
Tracking and visibility that you need to establish across the supply chain partners, right? So how to do all this, right? And I think is there no success stories? I think that there are a lot of success stories, even within my own work that we do in Hatio, the clients that we work with on digital transformation. We have a lot of successful stories, and I think stories of how companies have implemented successful digital transformation are rarely being told. I in my personal opinion, they're not just being told enough. There are a lot of stories, or rather there are a lot of sentiments out there, that says digitization is tough, digital transformation, this and that. But I think there's a lot of success stories that's worth telling is rarely being told, right? So I think the lack of understanding of what digitization means and how to make the transformation to a digital supply chain is probably the blocker to these businesses out there who's shying away.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think you're absolutely right. People do look at it as being onerous, as being massively expensive, as having an incredibly complex onboarding. So they think to themselves, this is really not for us. We're fine doing what we've always been doing. And certainly a lot of the big systems that initially came onto the market were really too much for the medium-sized, smaller companies to tackle. But now a lot of things seem to be changing, and there's a lot of new technology that's come out there. What are some of the things that would be easy wins, right, for companies within that category to be able to try out, to be able to implement in their own businesses?
That's right. So I remember back in 2018 when we decided to expand our market footprint to the Southeast Asia region, right? And we were so excited because back in Korea when we started in 2012, we were doing a lot of warehouse controls, executions, a lot of automation, robotics stuff, right?
Right.
And when we came to Southeast Asia, we were so excited about bringing all these things here, right? And then we kind of realized very quickly so we spent about 4 months traveling Southeast Asia. We find ourselves having very meaningful conversations with a lot of local SMEs. We're not talking about the multinets, right? The big boys. We're having a lot of conversations with these local SMEs, right? And we kind of realized very quickly that you're right? They don't seem to have the volume. It's not about affordability at this stage, right? But it's just that they don't seem to have the volume, and in any right mind of a business person, if I don't have the volume, how do I invest in this, right? And how do I look at ROI, right? So that's where it drove us to say, hey, look, you know what? Maybe the whole idea is to not to just bring this automation stuff yet, but is to basically help these local SME digitize, right? So hence that became our primary, very simple business mandate, right? And our motivation was really to help local SME digitize. Now, on this note, and that's where you're right? There's a lot of big softwares out there, big technologies and all that. So what are the opportunities for the small to medium-sized business, right? And I think that's the one good way to look at it is, and something that I've learned over time also operating this region, is that digitization doesn't necessarily mean you have to look at huge investments on ERPs or a full-blown automation setup. Of course, I remember, let me just share this story with you, right? I remember my first client 001, right? And the first guy that I spoke to in Southeast Asia, and when we came in and we showed them, we actually showed them videos of what we were doing in Korea, right? In CJ Logistics warehouse, setting up supply chains and all the automated carousels, robotic picking arms. And this man down in Southeast Asia look at us and say, Bernard, this is like my dream setup of a logistics center, a logistic hub. Wow, So we were talking about his dream, this is like a 45-year-old company based down in Malaysia, right? And we're talking about his dream of his, dream logistics hub and all that. And then, but when it comes to, so what's the investment it is? That's it. That's the end of the conversation, right? So and what I learned from there is, it's not to look at it from the full-blown picture, right? But to look at it from the point of innovation, right? And if you look at it, right, innovation in today's world, has brought us some of what I call the best of the breed technologies in the market today. So it's not necessarily a one ERP guy who does end to end, but it's a big $1 million investment, right? Just to own that piece of ERP in your supply chain, right? But take a look at all this best of breed technologies in the market. There's so many startups and companies creating really cool stuff out there, right? They might be smaller in size, but they definitely do have the edge of flexibility and speed to meet with your needs in digitizing your supply chain, right? And I think the biggest, and I think the biggest advantage in this picture, Jane, is that these tech companies are really making it really, really affordable, through the different kind of business models like software as a service, platform as a service. So I think that's where the real opportunity and a good way to start looking at digitizing supply chains for the smaller to medium-sized businesses. Yeah,
I think you're right. And it's interesting because I've come to realize that technology is not a differentiator, it's a leveler. Yeah. And that's because everything that comes out ends up starting expensive, being increasingly more affordable. And then, like you say, there's plenty of players who come in and offer budget solutions, smaller solutions, and so on, that enable really people to get on board with technology, whereas years and years ago, only the big players could possibly utilize these kind of. So if you are a company that hasn't digitized yet, or not very much so, what realistically might be the first step?
Well, I think the first step to look at it, and I'm saying this based on the experiences of engaging in this change process. I like to call this the change process, right? The change process with a lot of local SMEs across this region is that the first thing to understand is your own process. Don't try to understand the technology, because it's pointless. Understanding your own processes, understanding where you want to go with these processes or where it's next is going to be a very key first important small little baby steps that you can take first, right? And then eventually, because eventually what's going to happen next is you're going to have a whole range of technology players trying to sell you that technology. And then you're going to have a new problem will emerge, right? You're like, okay, so who do I subscribe to? Who do I buy? Right. Yeah. So if you don't understand your own process in a very clear manner, it's going to be very tough. Chances are you're going to make the wrong purchase decision on onboarding a technology. Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And it can be a tedious exercise to, I think what you're saying is to sit down and really document every aspect of what you do within the company. And then you're able to look at it and understand where you're going, and then find the right technology. But assuming that you've done that, right? Typically, where would somebody get on the train, so to speak, for this kind of digitization? Because there's many facets to it. So typically, what would be the first thing that they would implement? What technology would be the first thing, or what system would be the first thing? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Right. So if I were to take this from a very average perspective, right, I guess it would be looking at it from the point of view of digitizing the workflow. I think that the first thing I believe very strongly that needs to be put in place is to be able to first achieve and have visibility on your inventory movement. I mean, you talk about supply chain, logistics. It's all about this product moving from point A to point B. And that's about it, right? I mean, in a very simple manner to put it. So as simple as it is also the biggest challenge in, I guess, every single supply chain out there that there is, right? Is the whole, how do I get visibility of this movement of this inventory from A to B? right? Whether it's from the first mile side in a manufacturer, it turns into finished goods, it goes into the logistics process, and then it gets listed into the marketplace, especially with e-commerce today. And how does it all at the end reach to the end consumer? And you know what's the best part? How does the consumer then return it to you if there is a return? Right? And that's a whole new story, right? The first thing is really important to be able to establish a visibility of your supply chain, of your inventory. And to do that is really to hop on the digitization bandwagon, and once you take the first step, in fact, from our experience is that for all our clients, they are very, very quick win. And every time the feedback that we get from these guys are, hey, Bernard, you know what? It was just 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't even know whether my warehouse is full or empty. Or it was just 2 weeks ago, I don't even know whether I'm actually overselling or I'm always out of stock, right? But today, 2 weeks later today, I have a visibility of my inventory. I can allocate the products to the B2B, B2C, and the best part is right now, they are confident of selling more because now they know whether they are making money or they're losing money, right?
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think that nowadays, that ability to not only be able to see where all your inventory is throughout the entire supply chain, but also to more tightly manage costs is really critical for survival at times when inputs are increasing, uncertainty continues to be the new normal. So I think that's really great. Now, I think that when anybody looks at things, me too, running a business, you always want to understand what's the cost benefit. Because you look at these things and conceptually you like them and you see case studies of other people, what they've achieved and things like that. It all sounds good. But people really want to understand specifically how much money will it save me or how much time will it save me? And I realize it's different in every situation, but are there, general ranges that you might be able to point to?
Yeah, I guess on this question really is, there are three very obvious quick wins, right? That we've been seeing and experiencing with our clients and the projects that we've been working on across the supply chain and logistics in Southeast Asia. But one is the improvement on the service level. Okay. And the number two is basically the reduction in lost sales. And this has come, I've recently come to learn that this has been a pretty painful point, when you have lost sales, especially in a very fast moving e-commerce, days these days. And the third point really is about inventory and waste reduction, right? And interestingly, there's a lot of cost benefits, but I'm just going to focus on these three key points, right? And interestingly, recent research, which is being done by Accenture, right? It shows a 5 to 10% improvement on service level, right? Wow. And what this really means is that it says the brand, or the product owner or the retail is basically achieving, it means better customer experience, more efficient and accurate fulfillment, better management of delivery and returns. That's one, right? There's a reduction. The second point really is that there's a reduction in the loss of sales by up to 10%, and this in turn has led to higher revenue, right? No more oversell, no more out of stock situations, and digitization in the logistics to increase capabilities in the pick, pack, ship processes, right? There was a very interesting story, an interesting case study that just happened about 3 weeks ago. And we had one of our clients coming to tell us and say, we're using this 3PL guy, this 3PL service provider, and we have a big problem. But then I said, okay, so what's the issue? On the campaign days, right? They have this 11, 12 days, right? On campaign days, we had to stop selling. We had to for a few hours, turn off and stop selling over the e-commerce platform. And I was like, why? I mean, why would anyone stop sales, right? And the simple reason was because our 3PL guy doesn't have enough capacity to handle the orders. And we're like, what? And this is a big no-no, especially when it comes to the sales organization, right? I mean, it's why would I stop sales, right? Because I still have stocks. But because of that, right? So I think this is where, and the conversation eventually lead into, is all about basically how do we increase the capacity and increase the capabilities of the logistics processes within the fulfillment centers, right? And then as we start to identify, we realize there was a lot of opportunity for digitization to happen. For example, pick to light, better scanning processes, and it's all about the process, right? So this is where it gets really interesting. And imagine if the 3PL was actually properly digitized. That will only mean that his client doesn't need to stop selling, right? That's where it's a win-win, And of course, the last thing is really, according to this research by Accenture, is really that inventory and waste reduction by 10 to 20%. And this what this really means is that this directly translates into cost savings and at the same time driving greater sustainability across the supply chains, right? There's also another study which I find it very interesting, Jane, is there's a 2019 IBM global study which says 84% of chief supply chain officers stated that lack of visibility across the supply chain was the biggest challenge they faced, and that was in 2019, right? And this has really led to a lot of a huge inefficiency and waste, not to mention larger implications for companies overall in the environmental footprint, right? So I think these three key quick wins, is really the cost benefit of what you can gain over a supply chain digitization. And just to reiterate this, what we are saying here today is not for, big multinational, big brands or big retailers. Right. Even a small local SME small to medium-sized local SMEs within the local context are able to now get on the bandwagon and make a difference, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think that can be a game changer for these companies, especially because they don't necessarily have the cushion that larger companies have to be able to survive some of the chaotic things that have happened, particularly in the past 2 years. Now, we talked a lot about this from the perspective of a company that's a brand or someone who's doing e-commerce, more or less B2C. Is this applicable also for companies who are what we call suppliers? In other words, for mills, for manufacturers, for people who are supplying B2B?
Yep, absolutely. Our first Southeast Asia client in this region was a big B2B local business, 40 years, pen and paper, very manual, and the moment we went live with his business, he was completely overwhelmed with it, and give you some examples, because so these are the kind of logistics providers, right, that help their clients to send raw materials to their production plants and then to make it a finished goods and come back, right? So right now, what could be done or in sense of fulfilling a B2B order, right? What could be done in a 6-hour time frame before this, all this while could be done in a 45 minutes time frame. So right now, and let me tell you this, right? This is something that I learned as well. And because of that 6 hours to 45 minutes, and that was the very first time I learned about this term called just in time. Right. So it became a business model for this provider. So now he says, hey, I can do just in time right now, right? So I'm going to tell the client, if you want just in time, 45 minutes, that means you don't have to you can if you need this raw materials, I can get it to your production plant in 45 minutes out from my warehouse, right? So it become a business opportunity for the business itself, right? And I think this is where stories like that are really very interesting and exciting, to move and to inspire the rest of the supply chain and logistics industry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because people often don't see it from that way. We get so caught up in trying to struggle with the implementation of it, right? That you sometimes don't step back and see, well, how might this impact things in a much broader point of view?
Yeah, I mean, Jen, I just want to add to this point of yours, right? Because one thing I realized with these companies is that a lot of times they are looking from the point of view, it's like a point of view thing, right? They're looking from the point of view of historical. That means what's wrong with my supply chain, and let's try to plug the gaps.
Yes.
But they, in the process of doing that, they missed out the entire opportunity of how do I future-proof my supply chain. So they're not looking future. They're looking at historical, right? And okay, this is the gaps. Let's buy this technology to plug this gap. Let's buy this software to plug that gap, right? And then all these softwares eventually all work in silos. They're not integrated. Now you have a bigger problem right now. Why? Because when a COVID-19 hits, or maybe the next 3 new variant hits, right? your supply chain is you're still in square one, right? You're still in position one because you're not future proof to basically make the business sustain in any case that's happening, right? So I guess the one thing is maybe there should be a way to encourage, supply chain professionals to think future and not just look backwards. Yeah.
It's true. I mean, we all tend to do that. Me too, is to solve either current problems or previous problems without thinking about, well, how might we look also, as you're saying, to build in future opportunity or to improve things. It's just really a matter of fighting fires, staying alive.
Fighting fire. Yeah.
Yeah, that tends to be the way.
Yeah.
So if somebody is looking at implementing this kind of digitization, and as we're saying, there are multiple aspects to it, but typically what's onboarding? I mean, how long does it take? Is it something that can be seamlessly sort of dovetailed in, or do you need to allocate a certain period of downtime to be able to get your hands on it?
Right. I think, first of all, a downtime is going to be a big no-no for a lot of supply chain guys, right? It's like, hey,
Absolutely.
man, my goods needs to move, right? This pen or this product needs to move, right? It can't stop. So I think what's really important, in my opinion, based on our experience, is that to basically hop on this bandwagon is to basically segment this into phases. It's basically to sort of like line up your phase by phase and to really do this digitization in phases. I think many a times, the word digitization is so, I don't know, so sexy, or is it so overwhelming that when people look at they hear digitization and they hear technology, it's like, oh yeah, let's just install some technology into this and everything is there, and I think the truth of the matter of fact is it doesn't work that way. And it's very important to understand that it doesn't work that way, right? So what can we do, right? So, and these are, I've always tell this in every single new client or every single new partner that we work with. And we say, number one, so there's kind of 4 or 5 steps over here, right? I'm going to just run through this very quickly. Number one is to understand your starting position. You've got to know your as is. You've got to know what's current. How does your supply chain looks like? Or if you're in logistics, how does your logistics processes look like? Again, don't look at technology. Technology will be the next or maybe the last thing that you want to consider. But let's understand your starting position. Identify the areas for improvement. Know where is broken and identify the areas for improvement and what's for future, right? Number 2, then you define your strategy, right? You look at, you determine what is the vision, what is your supply chain vision here, right? Is it to distributor, B2B? Is it direct to consumer? Now, especially with the COVID, with this lockdown and this pandemic, we've just been working with a lot of brands that is like, hey, let's go direct to consumer, manufacturer to consumer, that kind of thing. So define a strategy that best support your business, right? And then develop a roadmap. I think a roadmap is very important. A lot of times companies take it for granted that implementing technology doesn't need a roadmap. It's like, okay, now we decide we're going to buy your technology. Okay, get the work done, get what work done, right? We're not installing a Microsoft Office into the computer. It doesn't work that way, right? So you got to have a roadmap, right? You got to know what are the implementation steps, right? You cannot have a downtime. So there's no downtime. How do you implement, if you have a current existing legacy ERP that you're using, what are the migration steps, right? How do we do this? Product master, location, and all that, right? And then come the next step, which is, and I think this is very important, which is take small little steps.
Right.
Don't go big. Not yet. We're not there yet. Right. Take small little steps, right? But with an end-to-end picture in mind. So you can see the whole end-to-end scope. And then you deploy small pilots. Okay, let's deploy your small pilots, right? Because most of the time, and then we spoke about the opportunities earlier on. We spoke about the opportunities of for these small to medium sized SMEs, right? Businesses on technology, and there's a lot of best of breed technologies. So many times, digital supply chain, it's not about only working with one software. there's a best of breed softwares that you can work with. However, don't do it at one go. 10 softwares, let's go. Don't.
Right.
Deploy small pilots, look at where are the changes, and pivot accordingly, right? So carry out small pilots, and then that's where you can start. By carrying out small pilots, that's where you can start to see those small little benefits.
Right.
That comes with it, right? Then you'll be able to put the whole picture together over a period of time, right? And then finally, once you have the pilot, you can see all these small little quick wins here and there. Then you look at a full rollout, what we call a go live, right? A full rollout. And what is more important is to be able to look at what are the other capabilities that we can develop and improve. So it doesn't stop there. Supply chain digitization doesn't stop the moment you install, the moment you deploy your software. It doesn't stop there. It's probably just the beginning of the game.
Right.
And the whole idea is, how do I develop this further, right? And how do I evolve? I mean, the last 20 months, I guess for a lot of supply chain professionals or supply chain companies out there, the last 20 months of lockdown and the pandemic has really, upended the entire supply chain. That's number one. Number two, look at the way e-commerce has took over the center stage.
Right.
And then we start to see that, oh wow, there's actually even big retailers and big brands are not ready for the e-commerce game because they've been so reliant on the retail brick and mortar sector, right? So they're just not even ready for the e-commerce game, and suddenly they have to be in the e-commerce game. So how does this all work out, right? And I think this is very important. This is what I always say. This is 5 key steps to really take into consideration, and don't look at it as a go big or go home. It's not that. It's a process.
Yeah.
Supply chain digitization is a marathon.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Now, just one more question. As someone who's worked in technology for so long, you've worked with mega systems, now you're working with things more tailored towards SMEs. If you're a senior management and you're looking to evaluate out of the many opportunities that are there, right? There's so many technology, so many different companies. Are there guidelines that you can recommend for someone who's looking at this and trying to evaluate which they've decided they want to digitize? Now they have to figure out, what do we go with? Are there guidelines?
Very, very. This is a very, very good question. These are also the questions that we think of in our marketing department as we market ourselves to the clients, right? I would say that, look, number one, there is no perfect technology out there. Stop looking for the perfect technology. When I say perfect technology, is like, set your expectations right. All right. There's no technology out there that, once you deploy into your supply chain, whether it's your warehouse or your logistics or your first mile or even your last mile, right? Or even your e-commerce, and it doesn't get broken. It will get broken. Which is why it's called a technology, right? Even Zoom calls gets broken down sometimes, right? So manage those expectations, and so don't stop trying to look for the perfect technology. Number two is to basically look at it from the point of view of the guy that you work with, right? It's very easy to just pass it off as buying or procuring a technology, a software, a system, right? Procuring a system from a company. It's very easy to just pass it off as that. But I think what's really important is also to look at not only procuring, but partnering, right? You got to just look at whether this vendor that you call vendor that you're buying the system or the software from, is this team, is this guy going to be your partner, right? Is he going to sit down and be concerned about your SEs and how you're going to go to 2B? How are you going to go from a traditional legacy, human decisions, manual labor into a system guided, data driven sort of approach? So, and I believe if it's just a mere procurement, I don't think this works, right? But it's got to be finding the right partner. So that's going to be the two very key things, in my opinion. And I want to just keep this really real, right? Not, what everybody's saying, but I don't just want to keep this really real because I do work with a lot of senior management when it comes and decision makers when it comes to technology for their supply chain and logistics, right? And I always tell them this, right? Because they will always ask me a question like, what if your technology broke? What if your software downtime? What if the server, what if? I was like, so the way I respond is, don't need to what if. It will happen. I'm telling you offhand right now, shit will happen. It will hit the fan and we'll all be firefighting. I say, it
Right.
will happen, right? But the whole idea is so now the support comes in, right? And
Right.
and how good this relationship is. And this is where I bring it down to the last point is it's got to be a trusted relationship.
Absolutely.
It's got to be on that trust. Look, don't just evaluate how good the technology is and how good the software is, but evaluate. Don't forget to evaluate, and it's a must. Evaluate whether this team, this guy, this company, whatever it is, are you able to build that trusted relationship? Because supply chain is a marathon. Supply chain is a 24/7 thing. It doesn't stop and rest.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a 3 a.m. thing, and I'm going to call you, hey, Jane, there's something wrong with the inventory SKU in this location. What do I do? Right? And it's in the 3 a.m. that this guy is going to wake up and solve the problem for you, right? So that's where I guess it's really important. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. It really comes down to the people. I mean, the technology, of course, is very important, but you also have to consider the people behind it. And on that note, I think a lot of people would want to try to reach out to you. How can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, so
Okay.
they can find me on LinkedIn on Bernard Hor. If you would like to learn more about us, you can just log on to click onto Hatio, Hatio, Hatio.asia. Yeah, and I'll be more than happy to take conversations. Again, it's not about sales. It's not about selling to you guys, but I really appreciate conversations, just like what we're doing right now.
Absolutely. Well, this has really been fantastic. I'm going to include all of those links in the show notes because sometimes it's hard to catch them when you're listening. But for anybody who wants to have that exact link, it'll be in the show notes. And I thank you so much, Bernard. This has been fabulous. And it's very exciting to see things developing in Southeast Asia from this point of view of technology and being able to take legacy companies and really give them a huge international advantage.
Thank you so much, Jane, for spending this time with me. And I look forward to seeing you in this part of the world soon.
I hope it will be very soon.
Very soon. Very soon. The light is at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their expertise, experience, and insights about succeeding in business and in life. And don't forget to check out our podcast website where you can find all of the previous episodes of the Seat at the Table podcast, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.